Hello everyone, this is Space Café Podcast, and I am Marcus. During the production of this episode, which got slightly delayed, I was traveling in a narrow valley in northern India and spared absolutely no efforts to ship it out right to your doorstep. Seriously, I had dial-up modem-type internet connectivity and lots of noise in my sparse hotel room, which featured hot water by cup shower type technology. Anyhow, here's what my place sounded like. Driving on the road is kind of unusual to my taste and nervous framework. Cows sleeping on highways, two-way traffic on one-way streets, and lots of honking. It's a land of different rules that seem to work, though. I got used to it, and I'm not complaining. And I guess we're in a similar kind of state when it comes to rules up there in space. It's a little like India. Lots of honking, lots of improv, lots of risk. Today we have a tidbit for all of you about just that. And we're going deep. I was wondering if I could, theoretically, launch my own little Space Café Podcast satellite, which we totally should, and dispute Elon's favorite orbit for his next constellation, because I like the view up there and I'm first. And also, would I be able to mine the diamond core of the moon, which of course does not exist, but just for the fun of it. May I. We have a wonderful guest who has all the answers today, right here in the studio. Professor Christopher Newman is a space lawyer who knows his stuff, and he's a pleasure to listen to.
I am Professor of Space Law and Policy at Northumbria University in the northeast of England.
Clear the stage for Christopher Newman. Welcome.
Marcus, absolute pleasure to be here with you, sir.
Super.
My research sort of covers law, policy, a little bit of the ethical applications of humans in outer space, the lack of a shared value system. I'm working on a piece currently developing work of other academics looking at notions of criminality in outer space and what a criminal justice system for outer space might look like. And so that's kind of the areas that I'm looking at. That's the areas that I'm really interested in. I also look at regulatory aspects of space activity, looking at the regulation of outer space, how that feeds into national and international space policy and international obligations as well. So I look at broad sort of areas of interest, but all within the field of what you would call space law.
Wow, beautiful. Crime in space, you got me hooked. Is there like proven records that there has been crime in space so far? In the past 6 years?
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because my sort of, the way I'm starting is looking at the type of people who go into space, because where there's living, there's police officers. There has to be. We that's the nature of us as a species.
And lawyers.
Absolutely. And so when we're starting to think about this, the first thing to look at is, okay, well, how do we, what type of people have gone into space before? And I've sort of broken it down into four broad categories. You've got the first generation of space travelers, the Cold Warriors, the military test pilots. Now, they were sort of governed by a code of military discipline. Mm-hmm. So really, you didn't have to worry about crime in space, because they knew that if they committed anything that was going to be badly wrong, they would likely be court-martialed. So they were the first sort of. Then in the second era, I'm broad, a very broad brush here. But the 1970s, the emergence of the shuttle and the space shuttle selection crew that was selected for the shuttle, we have the professional scientists who trained alongside the test pilots. Well, they were going up and they were taking their life's work into space, and they were training alongside military test pilots. So again, crime was almost designed out of the recruitment process.
There was still the military umbrella over
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was still very sort of military dominated, and the training. There's a great book by Mike Mullane called Riding Rockets, which describes a a very, what I have to say, sounds like very macho, male-dominated, less than ideal sort of culture, but very much rooted in that militarism. Then we have, and then I'm going to move forward, because then we have the third era, the hyper-rich tourists. Well, the individuals that there's a lot of money being spent, and I still think we're in that era right now, actually.
Dennis Tito was the first one, right?
Absolutely. Tito and Garriott and a whole range of people who had an awful lot of money and spent an awful lot of money going into space. Well, there was an element of selection. There was an element of recruitment. Famously, John Denver didn't make the cut. Sarah Brightman didn't make the cut. They both applied to go to space, but couldn't make it through the training. So there was a training element. So again, still, we had this element of selection going into outer space. And even now, right now, we've got, 600 people who've been into space. Tiny, tiny numbers. What I'm thinking of is, what happens when it does eventually become a mass industry, when it becomes, when space travel is ubiquitous like air travel, when we get those type of numbers, what are we going to do then? And I think it's kind of clear that the existing systems are going to be put under too much strain. The existing agreements just aren't going to work. We're going to need to look and see for new ways of dealing with it. A colleague of mine, Elizabeth Takes, has done a little bit of research into restorative justice and how restorative justice might have a role to play on things such as, a large interplanetary space flight, where space, actual physical living space, is going to be at a premium. So imprisonment isn't going to be an option. And what do we do if the suspect is mission critical? If they're the person who fixes the life support or the person who fixes the, what happens? How do we manage that? So I think we're going to require a whole new way of thinking about crime and punishment in space. I'm not proposing, criminal offences for space, but I am thinking about things like rules of evidence. One of the things that as a defence lawyer I might do, if I was looking at evidence provided, I ask, well, is that a direct link, or has it gone through a relay? Has it gone through a satellite? And the chances are it probably will have done. Well, that introduces another element into the evidential chain that we might want to consider. Has that been interfered with? Has there been interference with the evidence? So there's a whole range of stuff, if we keep our terrestrial perspectives on crime and punishment, that we're going to have to think about.
See, that may sound a little artificial, but just imagine the astronauts on the ISS had a little bit too much. This evening, they are deciding to fight it out, and one of them gets killed. So is there some kind of law in place for such a situation?
Now, the ISS is a really interesting example of this. This is a really sort of interesting way that they govern the ISS. The ISS is being pulled together legally, if you like, by what we call the Intergovernmental Agreement that governs the running of the ISS. It was first signed in the late 1980s. Then Russia became a partner. And so the current sort of agreement we've got in place is what we call the Intergovernmental Agreement, the IGA of 1998. And what that lays down is it essentially lays down it's the operating system for the ISS. And within that is a section on criminality, Article 22. And it talks about, and instead of looking at the territory, because one of the things the Outer Space Treaty does, Article 8, says if you've registered a space object, the state has jurisdiction and control over personnel and the actual object itself. So what the ISS agreement does is it kind of says, well, look, hang on. The ISS is made up of different modules, from different countries. So that's not going to be workable. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to have this bespoke solution where we go on the nationality of the individual concerned. So if it is a, astronaut from the UK, I'll say the UK because it's my own jurisdiction and I don't want to seem biased. But if it's an astronaut from the UK that's a suspect, the UK would be the applicable criminal law, would be the applicable investigatory authority. So that's, there's other elements to the ISS agreement, Article 22 as well, in respect of, well, what happens if the UK decides not to do that? There is a mechanism by which the victim state would be able to institute proceedings themselves. But essentially, it's the nationality of the individual astronaut concerned.
That's super interesting. So if I was to plan a crime on the ISS, I would first ideally go look for national jurisdiction and go look for the most benevolent nation in my case, and then commit the crime.
Become a citizen. Become a citizen, become accepted on their astronaut program, and then you commit your crime and you will get a moderate punishment. But that's another element of how criminality is designed out of the system, or they try to design criminality out of the system, because they've actually got the ICC Crew Code of Conduct. Now, the ISS, the Intergovernmental Agreement, covers astronauts when they get on the space station. The Code of Conduct covers them right from the start of their training. So right from the very start of the training, they're working to this Code of Conduct, which puts in place rules and standards and behaviors. And, pretty quickly, they're going to weed out people who they think are undesirable. Now, that's not going to completely eliminate crime, but it's going to do a fairly good job of keeping 6 people together living harmoniously. And that's what the ISS was designed to do. So kind of one of the a legitimate theory that has been put forward by a couple of academics is, well, okay, will the ISS agreement work as we move into outer space? Is that something we can do? Now, I'm not necessarily sure the ISS agreement itself, because that was designed for a very specific project. But what I do think that, and sort of the message that my research is giving me, is don't rely on established international law. Don't rely on the treaties. Put in place, if you're doing a bespoke project, if you're going into outer space and you're putting together a ship that's going to go on an interplanetary voyage, if you're contemplating, and this is something that I think is going to have to happen sooner rather than later, if you're contemplating a lunar base, you might want to think very early on about putting in place, an agreement with all of the participants, with everybody who's going to step on your base, as to who's going to have jurisdiction, what jurisdiction's going to look like, what the code of conduct, so that everybody's clear about it. So rather than have the emergency happen and everyone's scrabbling around trying to find a diplomatic solution, have it clear so that this is the agreement, this is what you signed up to, you're on our base, and this is how we do it.
So there's no such agreement for the moon yet?
No.
Okay,
no,
interesting. The moon is our next stage, because I guess we're not going to be on Mars anytime soon. So right. Moon first. SLS Artemis is trying to get there. So this will be the first place. So I could assume, I could imagine that we will need that jurisdiction ASAP, right?
It's going to be sooner rather than later. And what I think we've got the Artemis Accords, these series of multilateral agreements that weave together behaviors that are political in nature, that are not legal in nature, but that point back to existing treaties, that point back to existing ways of behaving, identifying norms of behavior. I would think that what we're going to see, because I know that the Artemis Accords are very much living, breathing documents. They're not intended to fix positions. They're intended to develop and, move as humans move. So I think that's going to be something that the United States and the Artemis partners are going to have to look at. Similarly, I think China are going to have to start addressing this as well. And China are going to have to start looking at it. They've got a very active, very vibrant lunar program. This is something that they're going to have to start thinking about as well. It sounds fanciful, and it sounds, space police, and it has science fiction ideas and conjures up science fiction images. But actually, it's the easiest way to have a diplomatic incident, isn't it? Person A is charged with doing something to person B, who are of 2 different jurisdictions. It's a very easy way to cause problems, and it's also very easily remedied. And that's what I'm advocating, essentially, that these agreements are nailed down.
So whose responsibility is that to come up with a solution here? So who is bringing people to the table? Is that the United Nations? Who's the responsible party?
I would think it's the states that are looking to go to the moon. I would think we're looking squarely in the direction of America. We're looking in the direction of China. We're looking in the direction of the Artemis partners. But
that's leaving out all the others. That's not fair. If we're talking about a common solution.
Now, this is the other thing as well, because these are very temporary solutions. These are importing sort of state-based solutions to the moon. Well, that's okay, because the moon is a few days' ride away. It's within the contemplation of Earth. It's not unreasonable, I don't think, to have a tie between the Earth and the moon in that respect. Where I think the problem arises, and where I think you're exactly right, is once we start becoming a truly interplanetary species. And that's where this is dangerous. That's where my solution is dangerous. And this is where I put my big star and caveat and say, hang on, we need to think about this. Because one of the big issues I think we have is that I don't think there's really a shared value system underpinning space exploration at the minute. I think we have an idea. Some people think it's to save humanity and a lifeboat for humanity. Some people think it's to get resources. Some people think it's purely a voyage of exploration. Some people think it's there because that's the human urge. There's a whole range of different reasons why people think we should explore. But underpinning that are a whole different series of values, a whole different idea of how we should live when we get into space. And I think that's one of the problems we've got as a species at the minute. I mean, for example, I wrote a chapter on this in a book a few years ago, that I actually think if we're looking for a shared value, why not have an ecological value? Why not have the belief or the idea that as humans going out into space, our one rule is do no harm? Mm-hmm. Whereas there are others who say, no, that's too precautionary. Space is there to be used. There's no sense that it's being used by anybody else. Let's use it. Let's get out there. So already we have a dispute between me, who thinks the biological sanctity of a planet should be prime, and somebody else who thinks, no, human desires and needs should be prime. There's
a beautiful rule I came across. I don't know when that was. Maybe it originates within the Boy Scouts. It says, if you go to a new place, leave it. Once you leave it in a better state than you encountered it. Yeah. I mean, this is all we would need, right?
Yeah. Well, that's it. I took mine from, I was, just before I was writing that chapter in 2014, I went to a book launch by a brain surgeon. And the brain surgeon said, look, my one guiding principle is do no harm. That, kind of the Hippocratic oath. Sometimes death is not the worst option. Mm-hmm. And so I thought about that, and I thought, yeah, that's a really nice way to do it. But of course, that poses an incredible duty on the crew, doesn't it? Because if it comes to the choice between the crew's survival and not harming an alien environment, we know what the crew is going to pick. And it's not going to be not harming the alien environment. They're going to go into survival mode. So it's an almost impossible ethos to have. It's really, really difficult. And this is what I mean about, because I come at it from a lawyer, but the law is the end of the process. You get the law when you have the agreed values, when you have the agreed policies and systems. So I could propose a whole raft and a whole range of laws that could stop space debris and all. But if it's not agreed, if it's not held as being part of our shared value system, people are just going to ignore it.
Huh. So how does that usually work to come to an agreement? I mean, I could imagine that requires decades or hundreds of years of social friction, tension, release, and whatnot, social dynamics, and at the end, we see it distills the essence of social friction, and that is the ethical value we're looking for. Is that the way it goes?
And it's really, really difficult because, as we know from lawmaking, it's actually a really messy process. Mm. It's not clean. It's not a situation that, the old saying, there's two things you don't want to see made: laws and sausages. And it's exactly the same, because lawmaking is about, value A bashing against value B and one of them winning. And, some laws are about compromise. Some laws are about absolutes. For example, let's think about punishment. Let's move it to punishment. Okay. Of the major space powers, how many have the death penalty? Well, the USA have the death penalty. China have the death penalty. So two of the major space powers have the death penalty.
Yeah.
As a European, That terrifies me. The
Yes.
prospect of a penal system that could find me guilty and could execute me. That for many people, I think in Europe, that's really uncomfortable. That sits really badly. And yet in those jurisdictions, they think it's a perfectly valid judicial response. That's the kind of problem we've got. We've got this real clash of values. It's not just about the administration of outer space. It's a complete value system that we have to build and that we have to establish. So it's no small task here.
Is there a good moment to find common ground? I mean, like, I could imagine that traumatized situations, like post-trauma situations, are fertile ground for common ground.
Yeah.
I mean, like, after the Second World War, after First World War, that was fertile ground because people knew what was at stake, what happened during that war, and then they sat together. There was no bullshitting around. Let's sit together. So something like this never happens again. So in our world today, I wouldn't say there's no trauma anywhere comparable to what I was just talking about. Are we capable to reach common ground at the moment?
I think we're on the other side of the hill. I think at the minute we're going up to that point of trauma. I think I completely agree with you. Law tends to come from tragedy. We know that you don't get seatbelts in cars until a certain amount of people have died through not wearing a seatbelt. You don't get, air cushions in cars because people die without them. So you find that this is what I mean about law being a very messy process. And I mean it in a horrible sense of it will cost human lives. It will take human lives before we discover the right way to do it. And you're exactly right. You look at the time when the value systems were embedded in Europe, the European Convention, 1951. Yes. Right after the Second World War. You look at the space treaties actually, and the negotiation around that. You had a series of critical events. You'd had the Cuban Missile Crisis. You'd had the testing of the Tsar bomber. You'd had the high altitude nuclear explosions.
It was close calls.
Yeah, you had a society, a group understanding that they weren't messing about, that they were dealing with really dangerous items here. And we then saw, within 3-4 years, we saw the Outer Space Treaty. So, I think it's really instructive that those cataclysmic events led to, we see it on a micro level domestically. In the UK, for example, I'm fond of giving the example of the Dangerous Dogs Act 1994, which came in after a number of your children had been killed by dogs. Seriously. So and that's what we see. We see that that's a very small example, but that's exactly how law tends to work. When I'm advising my students how to understand the law, the first thing I tell them, and I've grandly named this Newman's Law of Laws, right? And I know it's a bit arrogant, but I've always wanted something named after me. But I always say, if you want to try and understand the law, if you're lost, if you're looking at a piece of legislation, if you're looking at a treaty, look at the year. The year will tell you something about the circumstances that law came to fruition. Doesn't always work. It's not an absolute rule, but it does help you understand. The Outer Space Treaty 1967, perfect example. We had all those situations that were occurring. We also had uncertainty as to who was going to reach the moon first. So the two superpowers it was almost the prisoner's dilemma, wasn't it?
Yeah,
of how do we secure outer space because you might reach the moon before me.
Yeah. So
we had a treaty built around compromise. I think there's the price of peace at the minute is very, very high geopolitically.
This is utterly disillusioning when it comes to my vision of humanity. Because are we really only acting after or before it really hurts? So are we not capable yet to sit down and think about longer periods of time because we know that something might have happened, could happen? So I think we're in a very primitive state still. So it's like children who live from one moment to the next, not thinking about the time span in between. So that's kind of disillusioning.
Now, do you think so? I think it's quite encouraging, because I think it's encouraging that we've had these critical events and we have learned from them.
I don't want them.
I mean, yes, but we're never gonna get. There's always going to be a situation where something's going to happen.
A catalyst.
Yeah, it was. I think it was Harold Macmillan, the UK Prime Minister, asked what his greatest problem was, and he just looked at the person asking and he said, events. And events, that's the problem. So we're always going to have these. We're always going to have these cataclysmic occasions, and it's how we bounce back from them. We're geopolitically right now. We're at a very precarious stage, aren't we? You know it. I know it.
Yes.
Everybody. We are reaching an energy ceiling. We're reaching a situation where the previous restraints on activities of states are weakening, and we're coming to a point of it feels like we're coming to a point of crisis. It feels like something's going to happen. It might be wrong,
yes,
and it might just rumble on, but it feels that, doesn't it? It has the feeling of that. Yeah. And so trying to negotiate an enduring settlement, I mean, let's forget crime. Let's talk about space debris. We all know that space debris is a real issue. We all know that it's a problem. We all know that actually what would be really good is if everybody could get around the table, discuss a way of managing the orbital environment, of monitoring the orbital environment, of sharing all that data, and of removing the stuff from space that's going to cause a debris problem. It'd be great. But the likelihood of that happening seems very, very remote at the minute.
Because why would anyone care? I mean, although it's like climate change, although we know if we do not act now, we're going to be fucked in a couple of decades.
Yeah.
Especially with space debris. I mean, that's even worse. I mean, on a short-term basis, as opposed to climate change, because if we don't do anything, they say in 15 to 20 years, it could be game over for space travel.
And this is kind of the issue, and we're aware of it. We're a couple of white European males, and we're talking about this. There are countries that haven't had a say in this. There are voices that haven't been heard, and this is kind of exactly where you were at, a few moments ago. We need to get as broad a value system as we can. We need humanity reflected in outer space. And at the minute humanity isn't, there are a few very select voices being reflected as humans in outer space. But actually, we need it to be a lot broader than that. And that's how we get enduring systems. That's how we get, settlements that work. The Outer Space Treaty, when it was negotiated, was the result of consensus. And everybody got something. And we have to get back to that mindset. Now, the $1 million question is, how do we do that? And I don't know. But that's the only way. Law of itself, and this is something that I think non-lawyers and people who aren't in the law find it tough to recognize. If you just set the law, people will behave in a certain way, right? But of course, they don't, because that's why we have prisons. And so just setting the law isn't enough. There needs to be a journey of behavior. There needs to be a journey of understanding, of compromise. And there needs to be this coming together of the irreducible minima of what we are prepared to tolerate and what we are not. I don't think we're there yet.
I think just latching on to what you were just saying about that this is a critical moment in time that we're experiencing. I think it's also a watershed moment in time for us to find out if we are capable of being a truly globalized society. Because now we've had our experiences from back in the day, from the smallest villages and up to now the mega cities, but it's all local. Mm-hmm. Now, ever since the arrival of the internet and the globalized thing, now we're putting ourselves to the test as to if we mean it truly globalized. And that requires, of course, a globalized understanding and value system and whatnot. So this is a test, a massive test. And if we fail that test, maybe we're shattering ourselves back into it as that fragment of nation states and villages, maybe again. Yes, it's an interesting moment.
And I think as well, humans have never had this level of connectivity. We've never been this intertwined. I'm talking to you on a podcast right now. This could go viral. If I say something horrible, if I say something, and it will be if I say something nice, nobody will pay any attention to it.
Sure.
But if I were to say something really horrible, really controversial.
Like how sausages are made.
Right. If I said something really awful, then I could imagine UK Academics says X, Y, and Z would be around the world. And there's never been this capacity before for one individual to drop himself or herself in it as quickly as that. And so we're having to learn those behaviors as well. I'm not a psychologist, and I've only a rudimentary understanding of the sort of thinking behind this. But this level of connectivity is unusual and unparalleled as well. It's the type of connectivity that I think science fiction maybe had in mind, but the reality of it, I always say to my students when we're talking about predictive science fiction, Isaac Asimov didn't predict drunk eBay shopping. He didn't predict I'm going to come in at 2:00 in the morning after a heavy night and buy an inflatable Dalek.
I said the other day, I sat in a coffee place and I overheard two elderly ladies talking about the internet and their frustration with all this. And so one said a very interesting thing, and she said to the other one, the internet brings together things that do not go together. And that was an interesting point she made, because she was like, there's so many different cultures and places and nationalities and approaches to life on this planet. Bringing them together may not always be smart.
Absolutely.
Unfiltered. Bringing them together unfiltered. So that is an interesting point she made.
I think you're right. And I think as well, we've got the problems of cross-boundary contamination in terms of, as a law lecturer marking an essay, the amount of times I see American law creep in to an English law essay because they've got it off the internet. And so what we've got here is we do have the melting pot. The melting pot's online. And I think this is why, really interestingly, I think there's a lot of similarities in the problems between the governance of cyberspace and the governance of outer space. I think the two have very, very similar difficulties, very, very similar problems of trying to manage what are essentially, a cross-jurisdictional constituency.
Yeah. So let's go back into space. We left off with our philosophical excursion. So let's go back to the moon. So who owns the moon, in fact?
We all do. That's the great joy of the Outer Space Treaty. The moon belongs to everyone. The moon belongs to humanity. It's not a question of sovereignty. It's not a question of belonging to an individual. It's not a question of belonging to a state. The Outer Space Treaty, one of the agreed principles I think we do have. There are a few found within the Outer Space Treaty. This is why I think it's such a powerful document, actually, because it's a very short international treaty. It's not got many articles, but the articles that it has have really impacted upon the space community. And I think there's certainly a school of thought to say that a number of them have slipped into what we call customary international law, that actually all nation states, whether they signed the treaty or not, because there's so many state actors behaving in a certain way towards the treaty, that it could be regarded as just part of the fabric of international law. And one of the key elements is that states are free to use space and explore space without any interference, without seeking permission from another state. And that no state.
All right. So that means. Sorry to interrupt.
Please.
Just for me to, if I'm still on track. So, if someone found that the core of the moon was a big diamond, so they could take advantage of that without asking anyone else, or would they need to share their wealth with me?
This is the rub, because you've got Article 1 of the treaty, okay? And Article 1 says it's free for all states. Notice it's states, not individuals, but I'll come back to that in a minute. So it's free for all states to use. It's free for all states to explore. It's also free for scientific investigation. Article 2 then comes in and says that states cannot appropriate outer space or celestial bodies by occupations, by means of use, by any other means. So what that means is that a state finding this core of diamond in the middle of the moon can't go up there, plant a flag and say, this is mine. There can be no ownership in that sense. Okay. Now, let's say it's not a core of diamond. Okay. Let's say that it's some water. Let's say that it's some water. Now, water, as we know, really useful for living off the land. You don't want to be bringing all your stuff from Earth. If you can find some indigenous lunar water, that's going to make your life 20 times easier. So that in situ resource utilization, can we use that? Because is that not claiming, if I drink the water, if I shower in the water, am I not claiming ownership of it? Well, that's the tension between Article 1 and Article 2. I'm using the moon, I'm using its resources, I'm not claiming ownership of it. So that's how kind of Article 1 and Article 2 rub against each other. It allows free access for states. It allows states to use. It allows states to explore. It allows states to scientifically investigate. All of that's got to be done in coordination, in accordance with international law. And there can be no appropriation. So no state can say, I own this. Now, that's where it becomes really interesting, because that applies to the moon and other celestial bodies. So what does that mean if we find an asteroid that is 10 square miles by 10 square miles, made totally of gold? Mm-hmm. In order to use that, I mean, it would do untold damage to the world economy if we did that, because the price of gold would drop through the floor, and that would cause an enormous problem, right? And that's something that's kind of never really discussed. It's great to get useful resources, but if we just get precious metals, if somebody brings an asteroid full of platinum and gold, well, their value is going to drop like a stone, and you're just going to be left with a hunk of metal that you can't sell at the price that you thought you could. But this is the thing. And in order to use that asteroid, you actually have to what they call process it, which means destroy it. Yeah, grind it up and
that's okay.
Well, that's where I think we run into problems with the appropriation principle, because the ultimate act of appropriation is, of course, destruction.
Okay, but why can't I do it to the asteroid and not to the moon?
This is where we run into problems, because I don't think you could. I think this is where we run into the difficulties, the sort of the philosophical difficulties. Yeah. I think in practice, I think it's going to be very much easier to identify these exceptions. But I think before then, I think we've got to think about the actual infrastructure required doing that. Infrastructure, mining, it's an infrastructure operation. It's very, very expensive. It's going to be expensive to process it. It's going to be expensive to get the conditions out there to get it back to Earth. It's going to be expensive to get digging equipment. And, right now, the world is not flush with money. So, again, we're at another position where the economics of it are going to dictate it rather than the legal situation.
Luxembourg is gearing up for that kind of industry, right? So they're planning on exploiting space. In fact,
they've got legislation
on what legal basis?
So they've got legislation in place that allows for the mining of the use of resources. America has the same as well. Now, what they're saying is that Article 1 allows us to use the resources. So we go and we mine a little bit of the moon. We're not appropriating it. We're just using the resources that are there. Okay. And the argument that's being put forward in that sense is, and I'm going to take you to Article 6 of the treaty. So we're bouncing up to Article 6. So Article 6 of the treaty says that states are responsible for authorizing and continual supervision of activities where it's done by non-governmental entities. So if I'm a mining company, what I have to do is go to my government and say, this is what I'm planning to do. And they have to supervise it, and they have to firstly authorize it, then they have to supervise it. Okay? And what the Luxembourg law and what the American law say they're doing is they're complying with that. We're putting in place a statutory framework for that. So that's the one side of it. The far side of the spectrum says that actually Article 2 prohibits any appropriation. So by using that bit of the moon, you are appropriating it, and that's not allowed. So this is where we again have conflict. We have conflict in values. And the treaty kind of, in many ways, there are lots of agreed principles in the treaty, but there's also these areas of tension. There's these areas where Article 1 and Article 2 do rub against each other.
I find that fascinating because, this is when a comparison to our own history on Earth when we started conquering the Earth does not really apply anymore, because on the Earth there was no legislation around when it came to conquering new territory, because the one who was there first and was more powerful than the other one got the land. This does not work with space anymore because of the space treaty from the 50s, right?
That was the plan. That was always the plan, was to make sure that there was no sort of colonial element in the treaty prohibited this sort of colonialism. It wanted to stop the two superpowers getting into space and having another colonial battle.
And shoot it out.
Yeah, exactly. For ownership of the moon, ownership of the particular orbit. It wanted to get away from all that. It wanted to make space. Again, looking at the time when it was formed, the 1950s, the 1960s, it was this desire to move away from the destruction that we'd seen in the world wars to have space as somewhere free for all that. And that's kind of, we've forgotten about that. And we're now looking to get us, we're now looking to try and use space and use the resources up there. And we're running into problems because, again, back to the point, I don't think we've quite nailed this value as to why we're doing it. There are some who are very certain why we're doing it. There's some that, yes, this is our duty as a species to plan our escape off planet Earth for when we've completely used it up. And, I respect that, but I don't necessarily agree with it. So it's clearly not a shared value, and I know there will be some who share my views that actually we should try and make the place, either certainly do no harm when we get there, or do as little harm as we possibly can when we get there. So you're right. It's what we said earlier on. There's a long way to go, and we're going to get progress, but yet we might get that progress at the expense of a tragedy.
It seems like, Christopher, that seeing what Elon is doing, what Jeff Bezos does, what the Chinese as a nation do at the moment, that anyone who has the necessary funds can become part of that game up there, that space race. So could I, as an individual, also participate in that game? Could I launch my own private little Marcus Space Café Podcast satellite up there?
First thing, you'd need a bit of money, because to get up there, but let's assume you are a man of wealth and,
Sure.
The first thing you'd have to do is go to your National Space Agency, because again, back to Article 6 of the treaty, Article 6 of the treaty requires states to authorize and supervise any space activity. Now,
well, let me find out if there's an Austrian space agency.
There is. There absolutely is.
Okay.
And you'd have to go to them, and you'd have to get their regulatory approval, because I can't speak to Austria, but let's say you wanted to do it in the UK. Let's say you're UK national, you wanted to do it in the UK. If you didn't seek that approval, and if instead you went to Ariane, knocked on their door with your satellite under your arm and said, "Can you pop this in the nose cone, please?"
It's not that heavy, so
I would think so. And they popped it in the nose cone, and your satellite was up there. You would be committing an offence under English law of unlicensed space activity. So that's how the UK deals with its duties under Article 6. It makes sure that everything that goes into space is licensed, and if it isn't licensed, or if it behaves in a way that isn't in accordance with the license that was issued, then it's unlicensed activity and you are committing an offence.
So it's like licensing
exactly
my new car.
It's exactly the same. And I actually think that's a great analogy for how regulators work. They can't sit over your shoulder all the time. So what they do is they put a test in place and an application procedure. Make sure that what you're planning is safe. Make sure that it's going to comply with the Outer Space Treaty. Make sure that it complies with their international obligations. And almost all states will make sure that it doesn't interfere with their national security as well. So there's that element to it. They'll make sure that you're not going to be, you're not going to be putting stuff up there that could be dangerous, or B, you're not doing stuff up there that might be dangerous to satellites from countries that would regard any incursion as being hostile. So there's a whole range of requirements that licensing looks at, but it can be boiled down to those three things. Is it safe? Does it comply with the international obligations? And, is it within the realm of our national security?
All right. Okay, good. So provided I get that license, I have my satellite, I got my launcher. Now, what if I decide, because this is a race also for the best plots in orbit at the moment. So this is like the gold rush, the Oklahoma land run going on at the moment. So what if I decided I wanted a specific orbit that, by coincidence, is the targeted orbit for Elon's next constellation? What if I'm first?
Then you're there. First come, first served. I was going to say, my next point would be, the next question I've got for your satellite is, where is it going? Would you want it to go into geostationary orbit? Well, if you want to go into geostationary orbit, there's certain rules and it has to be registered with the ITU.
I want to see it all the time. I want to sit on my balcony and see it.
Right, so you want geostationary orbit then? Well, that's going to cost you some more money, because the launcher to get up there is going to be even more expensive. So it's going to cost you a few more quid. And the regulator are going to be a little bit more sort of zoned in, because all of the expensive stuff's in geo, and they won't want your little satellite just bubbling around up there. They'll want to make sure that you've got control over it. They'll want to make sure that, you've got a deorbit plan. If once it stops working, are you going to push it up to a graveyard orbit, which is probably what they're going to require? So there's going to be a whole range of stuff that they're going to look at in a little bit more detail. And so that's one of the things. So if you want it in geostationary orbit, then that's, there's more scrutiny, there's more license that you'll have to satisfy. If you want it in low Earth orbit, then you might not be able to sit and see it on your balcony all night, but you'll certainly be able to see it.
Okay. Okay. So then I have my iPad on the table, and the iPad, of course, holds the control for the satellite, and my underage kids play with that iPad and start to move that geostationary orbit somewhere else, and it bumps into Elon's constellation. What happens next, other than I'm getting a call from Elon?
The first thing that might happen is that Elon's satellites have got autonomous collision avoidance. So they may make an independent decision to move anywhere. They may say, they may move of their own volition. But let's say they don't. Let's say you, for whatever reason, your moving is so unpredictable and your satellite is so unpredictable that it is going to crash into another satellite. Now, let's say you've launched it.
Drunk driving in space.
Right, exactly. And you've launched it from the UK and it bashes into, let's not make it too complicated. Let's not make it a hostile power. Let's say you bump into, an American satellite. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, what we do is we go to Article 7. Article 7 of the Outer Space Treaty deals with liability. And what this does is it creates another category of state. So within the Outer Space Treaty, you've got state signatories, but you've also in Article 7 got a different type of state. You've got a state called a launching state. Now, the launching state, there's 4 ways you can be a launching state. That may sound counterintuitive, but there are 4 ways you can do it. You can either launch a craft yourself. You can procure a launch. You can allow your territory to be used by a launch, or you can allow your facilities to be used for launching. So there's 4 ways in which you can become a launching state. Now, Article 8 helps us out just a little bit, because you want to register your craft. You want to make sure that you've put registry on it, so you've got jurisdiction and control over it. That's how Article 8 incentivizes you to to register it. Okay. And if you register it, you put the name of you deal with the launching state. You say, right, well, okay, so I've gone to Ariane to launch it. So I'm going to be using Kinez territory, but it's going to be, I'm going to be the launching state. I'm not going to ask the launchers to take liability for this. I'll do it myself. So you be the launching state. You're UK. Yeah. So the launching state is internationally liable for any damage caused by its space object to the space object of another state. Right? But that doesn't tell us anything, does it? That just tells us they're internationally liable. So what we've got is we've got the Liability Convention 1972. That was signed. There were 4 treaties signed after the Outer Space Treaty. And if you like, they put a bit of flesh on the bones of some of the principles in the Outer Space Treaty. Because some of them, such as the return and rescue of astronauts, there was like a few lines in the Outer Space Treaty. Well, that was never going to be enough. So what they did was they negotiated rescue and return, and then they negotiated liability. And liability is dealt with in the Liability Convention of 1972. And it defines what damage is. It defines what a space object is. Helpfully, it defines a space object as being an object launched into space or a component part thereof. So it defines it by defining it itself. It defines what damage is, et cetera, et cetera. And then it has 2 categories of liability. So the first category of liability found in Article 2 is if there is damage caused to anything, anyone of another state, on the surface of the Earth or to an aircraft in flight, then you're going to be, the launching state is going to be responsible. No ifs, no buts, no questions. It's absolute liability.
Okay.
It's that liability is, all you have to prove is that space object landed on that plane, or it landed on that person, or it landed on that roof, landed on that building. Liability and liability is with the launching state.
So if like it really happened, Elon's rocket body falls down to Earth, back to Earth in someone's backyard, that's the United States.
If it causes damage, then the United States is internationally liable for that damage. Okay? Don't need to, Elon could say, it was somebody else's fault. It doesn't matter. In international law, Article 2 tells us that liability is absolute. But we're in space, right? We're talking about robots hitting robots. Yes. Then we look at Article 3. Article 3 talks about damage elsewhere other than the surface of the Earth or aircraft in flight. So it's talking about outer space. And it then says, if space object of a launching state causes damage to another launching state and it's their fault, then they're liable. So it introduces a fault-based element, right? So what you've told me about you have a couple too many, you start moving your satellite about, clearly we're into the fault regime here. Yeah, we're into fault. Yeah. But let's say that what actually happened was satellite A is there, satellite B is there. Who moves? Who decides who moves? Satellite A is going to say, well, I'm not moving because I've got very little fuel. Satellite B says, well, I can't move because I'm unpropelled. Right? So how do we establish fault in those situations? Does one have a duty of care because you've not got fuel? Do you have a duty of care to monitor your satellite and put out information about it? Do you have a duty because you can move to move? There's all these different elements of liability that we see emerging. And that's assuming you can prove causation. Because of course, one of the key elements is damage to satellite A was caused by satellite B. Well, how do we know? How do we know if we don't have custody of the object, if we're not observing the object? All we might see, the first thing we might know is the satellite spinning. So we'll see the flashing lights. Well, what's happened? That's been hit by something.
You know what? I feel like we should abandon space. It's getting too complicated.
Well, I don't think. See, this is the thing. What we're doing is, as we're moving forward, when we're launching two satellites and 3 satellites here and there, that's fine. But we're launching hundreds and hundreds of satellites a year.
Yeah,
and that's the problem is just the numbers. The complexity doesn't change. It's the numbers that are changing. And so what we have to do to deal with that is think about, right, are we going to introduce some sort of management system, some sort of coordination system? So, how are we going to improve our tracking? Those are the questions I would be asking right now if I was thinking, if somebody gave me a magic wand and said, right, I can, I'm making you emperor of space for the day. The first thing I'd do is I would dramatically upscale our tracking, our space surveillance and tracking capability. I would really upscale it. I'd take it out of the hands of the military and put it in civilian administration so it doesn't get caught up in classification madness. I would also try and introduce some sort of coordination system. Maybe a management system's a bit too full on for outer space, but maybe coordination system where, collision avoidance maneuvers and measures recommending sort of that type of thing are put in place. Yeah, I think there's a lot we can do. And there's a lot that's actually possible here, actually. I'm not talking about big overarching treaties that require massive agreements. I'm talking about data sharing. I'm talking about putting information about the space environment out there. I'm talking about upping the sensors that we already have. So these are the areas that I would look at.
Say, Christopher, how serious are lawmakers taking all this? I mean, is there pressure and some serious pace behind improving all this?
That's a really crucial question. That's one of the things, again, when I'm asked, what can we do? How can we do something about this? The best thing that anybody can do is go and see their elected democratic representative and say to them, we need you to do something about this. We need you to do something, because at the minute it's with the space community talking to each other. We all know the problems. I guarantee you, everybody listening to this podcast will know the difficulties we've spoken of, will be aware of the issues, will be aware of the problems. I won't have told anybody anything new there. But there will be people who should be listening. There will be elected representatives. There will be members of our parliaments. There will be members of the government who don't know this. And they're the people who really need to start taking notice. And that's the big problem we've got, because they've got a lot on their plate at the minute. We've got an energy crisis. We've got all sorts of economic crisis heading down the road. We've got a cost of living crisis that's hurtling. People are not going to be able to feed their families. And I'm going to be knocking on my local representative's door and telling him about spacemen, But this is the problem we've got, because it's exactly the same as it's an environmental problem. And I think if we put it in those terms, then it might start to be heard a little bit more than robots bashing into each other. I think if we start talking about an environmental problem in low Earth orbit, then we can do it, because it's an environmental problem we can fix. It's an environmental problem we really can sort this out.
But we're not ready to fix our own environmental problems on Earth. So why would we do it in space? So I mean, the human condition is still.
We're back to tragedy, aren't we? We need does a human need the tragedy before they'll act? And I think that's probably it.
So how do you personally go about your job? Do you go happily every day to the university and teach space law? I mean, it could also become a frustrating endeavor, because what should be done, what could be done, and you see that it's not done.
I honestly think the teaching of space law, the teaching of it, is the most important thing I do, because it's bringing it into the mainstream. It's telling regular, I'm not teaching on some obscure sort of, space course. I'm teaching right in the middle, right in the heart of an undergraduate law degree. So I'm teaching alongside land law, environmental law, medical law. And that's where I think it's really important to get people socialized to the idea of hearing space as another element of law. Oh, yeah, we've got to deal with that, rather than, I always call, it's something that I heard called the giggle factor, getting rid of the giggle factor, and whenever we talk about space, people always, oh, you do space law. And it's always a smile and a giggle, as if, I'm slightly strange. Now, I may be slightly strange, but that doesn't detract from the fact that space needs to become mainstream. It needs to be something that people accept. So absolutely, I go to university, I teach my space law every day, and I think it's the most important thing I can do, because it raises awareness amongst young people who aren't necessarily interested in space, but they're interested in the practice of law. They're interested in policy formulation. They're interested in the operation of government. They're the people I really want to talk to, because they're the people who are going to be able to make a difference.
Is this a field you'd recommend a young student to go into? Because maybe this is a field one could build a career on.
I love it. It's a great way to study the law, because we're seeing the evolution of a legal system. We're actually seeing it coalesce before our eyes. We're seeing the problems of shared values. We're seeing the difficulties of establishing common beliefs. We're seeing the rough edges. It's not there's not a textbook that I can hand you with a complete answer. It's emerging, it's developing, it's evolving. So it's like literally watching a living organism develop. And there are tendrils that spread off. We've got cyber governance that comes into space. We've got artificial intelligence governance that comes into space. Bioethics, all of that comes in and starts touching and dealing with it. Media law comes in, direct satellite broadcasting. There's a whole range of stuff that really pulls in. So, when I talk about it, I'm genuinely passionate about it, because I think it's A, really interesting. I think B, it's a side of law that we're going to see develop and we're going to see emerge and increasingly become important. And I also think it's an area where, if you've got an interest in space exploration, what a great way to sort of combine a career and a hobby.
And it also sounds kind of cool. I mean, like, if I was a lot younger and unmarried, meeting a young female space lawyer sounds kind of attractive. It's
the only way I will ever appeal cool, right? This is it. You're talking to a flabby, white, middle-aged male. I've got nothing interesting to say about anything, but space law is a great way to access it, and it's a way that anyone can get involved. We can have also, the more voices, the more diverse the voices we get, the better it's going to be, because it precisely needs the diversity of voices. It needs less people like me. It needs more people with different life experiences, different ethnicities, different genders. It needs all of those different voices to come together and create what's humans' future going to look like. I know that sounds really needlessly idealistic, but it's genuinely what I believe. That's the future. That's the way we get things done. That's the way we hopefully avoid the tragedy, or we deal with the tragedy.
Do you remember Starman? Like the Elon's star guy. He shot into orbit. Was that okay? In fact, I mean, like, to put a human-made object in such a manner into space. It's like halfway through the solar system.
I'll tell you who you really want to talk to about this. My friend and one of the most brilliant scholars in space that I know, Dr. Alice Gorman. She talks about space archaeology and about unpicking the objects we send into space. That is something right in her wheelhouse. And it's fascinating to see the effects of the objects that we've sent. It's an area I'm not an expert on, and I wouldn't insult it by.
But legally, like from a legal standpoint, is there anything that you would object to putting such a stunt into space?
The problem we've got is Article 6 of the treaty. If the national regulator thinks it's okay, it's okay.
Then
it's and I can see kind of there's going to be a lot of people who are going to go, yeah, it's a cutesy stunt, and space is very big, and the car is very small, and the I get that. I get that.
Yeah.
But I think, if that regulator thinks it's okay, let's hope that they've thought about it and they've thought about the implications of it.
It's the Americans. I think they're good with something like this. Christopher, I got two questions. So we're building up a Spotify playlist for space travelers, future space travelers. And space can be boring sometimes, so you would like to cheer up your boring life with a little bit of music. What kind of tune would you want to see in that?
What a great question.
Playlist?
Well, you see, I'm a child of the 70s. So I grew up kind of listening to T-Rex and, of course, the Beatles, and Paul McCartney were there. So I think I'd probably want to listen to something by McCartney, because he's a genius. And I've got a lot of time, I'll have a lot of time as I drift amongst the stars. So I want it to be good. So I'll listen to, I'd probably take a Paul McCartney album.
Good. You got one tune. Because I will put that on the playlist.
Okay, one tune. Big Barn Bed. The first album of Red Rose, the first track of Red Rose Speedway.
All right, good. I'll introduce that to our beautiful playlist right after.
With the caveat that it's from an old man.
And then question number 2 is this. Well, you're an Englishman, so I think you may not be able to answer that because this is a coffee place. It's the Space Café podcast. So in coffee places, you sometimes energize yourself with an espresso. Sorry, I'm just kidding. So why don't you share an espresso for the mind with our audiences, a piece of inspiration that could function like an espresso for the body, but
for the mind.
For the mind. What would you like to share? You can pick whatever kind of topic you want to pick.
My friend was going through a really rigorous application process, and he really, really, really wanted the job. And the application involved like 18 steps. I mean, it was really in depth. They really got the squeeze the juice out of him before they got there. And he came to me and he said, Chris, he said, what do I do? It's so big. You know, I've got this to do. I've got that to do. I've got this to do. And I said to him, you play pool, right? And he said, yeah. I said, right, pot the ball that's on. Yeah. Don't worry about 4 times. Don't worry about what's coming down the street. Don't worry about the next pot, the pot after that, because you're leaving the table if you don't pot the ball that's on. That's my espresso. That's the one piece of advice I think that is good and useful to everyone. Pot the ball that's on.
Wonderful. I love that. Thank you so much. Christopher Newman, thank you so much for taking the time in this. It was really
It's been wonderful to talk to you, Marcus. Thank you so much. It's been a privilege to talk to you.
Thanks for being there, and thanks for your ratings on various platforms. But we need more of them to float up to the top of the ratings. We are well on our way, but the air is getting thin up there, as we know. So, if you're down to helping us, let me help you now. So, where would you find the rating section on iTunes, for example? So, first of all, in order to write a review, go to your podcast's listing in the app and tap on Write a Review. It's as simple as that. On Spotify, it's a little different. To leave a rating, navigate to a podcast you want to leave feedback for. So first, tap on the follow button, then tap on the star button and follow the instructions to rate the show. You may be prompted to listen to a few podcasts first. Anyways, you've done that so far, you crazy nerds, right? Thanks for your loyalty. I look forward to next time with you. Bye-bye.